Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cosmic Corner on Faith Unaltered. Man, it is good to be here to do this episode. This has been a long time coming. I'm excited. I'm already pleased. Here with me, wonderfully enough, to graciously give us his time and attention is our best friend, Gerritt. Welcome back to Cosmic Corner, and we're going to be doing something rather special tonight. The first conversation that I had with Gerritt wasn't even on Faith Unaltered. It was on CSG, the sister and, well, perhaps mother to Faith Unaltered that came before and gave way to this remarkable project that you see before you. Thank you for that, Amber. It is a nice tree. My wife and my children helped me to have a beautiful backdrop. And so I'm super pleased to be able to revisit our first conversation. We're going to be listening to it and responding to it as a review here because it has been almost 3 years since we had this conversation. This predates Cosmic Corner by well over a year. So it's kind of an interesting to think about. I've been doing Cosmic Corner for over a year, and this is at least that much older than when I started that project. And so it's kind of cool to be revisiting this and knowing that we've developed so much more of this idea since we've had that conversation. And so I just want to go back to it and be pleased to hear it again and upload it onto Cosmic Corner. But I didn't want to stop there. I wanted to add to it as best we could. And so welcome back, Gerritt. This is going to be awesome. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's always an honor to be here. I'm very excited. You know, even as we get ready to dive into this episode, I'm captured by the little subtitles under our names, right? So just for anyone watching, the reason I am the Padawan is because Josh is the storyteller. And I want to, it was, let's say it impressed upon me about 3 years ago, roughly, that this was more real than we like to think about the context of the video today being seeing the world through a story. And it started to occur to me through various explorations that that could very well be the case. And who does the Lord connect me with right around that time? But this gentleman right here, who's been exploring this himself. And then so together we had a ton of fun, and we've sharpened each other. We've learned a lot. And so it's kind of really exciting to dive back into what really is either our first or second collaborative project together, to really kind of re-listen, remember, and hopefully elevate the conversation a little bit with some additional details, or at least a little enhanced clarity. So I'm stoked to be here. This conversation and this topic has fundamentally transformed how I approach the faith and how I approach apologetics, most importantly. So I want to say what we're talking about here today is perhaps the most practical thing about Christianity you will ever learn. And I don't want to undersell it to say that. I mean that from a personal perspective. So I hope you guys all enjoy, and I can't wait to get started.
Cool, right on. Well, before we hop in, I want to acknowledge both of our wonderful mods in the chat, Jamie and Amber, and again, congratulate and be so excited to say that Amber is officially a part of the Faith Unaltered crew. She has decided to join us and integrate and be more involved, and we are more than happy to accept that and to welcome her on board in whatever capacity that brings in the future. But again, thank you, Amber, for being the blessing that you are. And also, hi, Phyllis. Phyllis is a wonderful lady from my church that my wife goes to help out a couple days a week, and she's there, and they're listening right now at her home. So hi, Phyllis. And hi, Emily, and my lovely children, because they're more than likely right there in the room. But yeah, so I am super excited. I'm going to bring this up. So I've cut off the first couple of minutes because it's Tyler doing his Tyler thing where he pops on and is just so excited, like I am, to be here, and explains what show we were on and so forth. And so we're just gonna hop right in with one of Tyler's first questions. And I thought that this was a good way to start it because it gives some backdrop to why this conversation is so important to Gerritt and I. So with that, I'm gonna play this real quick, and we'll pause as needed. How about that? Cool.
Josh, a little bit. How did you and Gerritt get connected? And then after you kind of delve into the story a little bit, I'll let Gerritt introduce himself since he's never been on CSG before. But how did you guys connect? Well, what's the story there?
Well, oddly enough, or not oddly at all, it was our friend Joshua Sherman, who's a frequent on CSG also.
Yep.
And I talked to Sherman often enough that we had kind of let's say crossed swords in our talks with one another about several really complex things. And then we started talking about things like icons, like imagery, like different stories of patron saints and things like that. And I started getting really interested in story as a means of interpreting reality, as well as scripture, on top of exegetical truths and things like that. Obviously, that's still valid, but it's just an interesting, let's say, like addition to the practicality of living, is to understand, let's say, where you are in the story. You know what I mean? And I say the story because what we're going to be explaining tonight is that there is a story, and that the misconception that I think a lot of people have when they hear story, or they think about my story or your story, is that we're all living in disjointed stories, sharing a setting, but not sharing a story. And I'm the main character of my own story. It's like, that's simply not true. And there's a good reason why that's not true. And that's kind of what we're aiming at explaining tonight, is how helpful and powerful good storytelling and the formation of story can actually inform you about your own personal habits and practices, and how it is that you can use that to not only connect with your neighbor and love them better, but also to worship God better.
Amen. And I think that's something that, as the body, and just even as individuals, we need to spend more time doing that. We need to spend more time worshiping God, and not only that, but fellowshipping with other Christians in participating in that action, doing those things. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to encourage all of our listeners of CSG, get out and worship God, enjoy God. This is why he made us, to fellowship and to be with him forever, right? And so enjoy God. But Gerritt, first time on CSG, brother. For those who don't know you, you introduce yourself, give us a little background, because you and, or I think you added me. We've been friends on Facebook for a little bit now. And so did we connect about
through
the same
Sherman.
time you and Josh did? We did connect through Sherman. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just haven't talked as much as you and Josh have. You know, like off air and stuff. But yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Tragedy.
It is, especially after last night's conversation. Oh man, I'm looking forward to this. But yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself, Gerritt.
Well, I want to say off the bat that I'm very humbled to be asked. Tyler, I have great respect for you and how you've managed conversations that I've listened to. Josh, obviously, that goes without saying. And so, again, I'm very humbled to be here. I don't have an incredible story. I was basically like a militant atheist in college who spent my time trying to get Christians to fold the cards up. And let's say I went through a long humbling road, we can say. And in that place, let's say my life was changed dramatically in about a moment. And I've spent about the last decade or so trying to unpack that and trying to understand it. You know, obviously, you know, it was a moment where I would say it was kind of like feeling like I saw beauty, like pure beauty. And it was, you know, I wanted to come, right? It looked like the right thing. It looked correct. It looked like the truth. And so it's been the journey I've been on ever since. And recent investigations led me to run into people. I love Davidson that you said you talked to Sherman, kind of crossing swords. And I was reading Sherman's comments thinking, I don't want to cross swords with this guy, but I want to talk to him. And so you know, that's the high level version, we'll say. And here we are.
Right on, brother. Right on. Well, it is an absolute pleasure to have you and to dive into this topic. So, Davis, I'm going to turn this over to you, brother, because like you said, you and Gerritt, you've been investigating this a while now. And so go ahead, give our listeners, again, if you have a question, you're listening to this episode right now, you got a question, 1-855-450-6624 is that number to dial. We do have the experts on about narrative structure tonight. And so give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. But Josh, go ahead, man. What is narrative structure? Why is it important?
Could we pause for just a
how
moment?
Does this apply?
So I just want to clarify one thing, which was the beauty I encountered all those years ago was Jesus Christ. I didn't say that in the thing, and I forget why at the time, when offered an opportunity to share your testimony, I really bumbled that. So I just want to ask for forgiveness there. So without going too deep into it, Jesus kind of slapped into my life like a Mack truck as a really ardent atheist, really changed my life in literally a moment. Changed my heart very much to love and see people, and so much in a way that we're going to talk about. So I'll let that move, and we could go right back into the content. Wanted to say that it was like my first time ever being online at a live podcast, and I think I was just real nervous and bumbled it. So it's just a little bit of forgiveness if possible.
I was going to say definitely some grace necessary. It's difficult to do something like this live. If you're not in the habit of it, it's even more difficult to do something like this live. So it's to be expected. There's always going to be those, you know, post-show shower thoughts that just flood your head, you know. But yeah. So getting back to it.
There's a lot of questions here, but how does this apply to Christianity? Like, what is this that we're talking about whenever we say narrative structure?
Well, ultimately, it would be something approximating looking at life as participating in an ongoing story. And what I mean by that is it's almost inevitable that the way we look at the world, the way we experience the world, even the way we experience remembering something or planning for the future, all happens within the framework of a story. If you remember something, good luck remembering it as anything other than imagery and tell your story. You tell yourself a story about whatever it is you're remembering. That's the form that it takes when you remember something. And it's almost impossible to think about the future and make a plan for something future tense without telling yourself a story about what you will do, and then kind of almost play it out in your head, like you make an imaginary avatar of yourself up there somewhere, and then you let that play out, and the ones that don't work out, you simply don't act it out, right? And
Yeah.
it's so immersive being in a story, right, that we almost don't notice that that's how we're behaving, that's how we're thinking, that's how we're perceiving, that's how we react to things. And it's kind of the way of thinking about, really it's about participating in that story. Almost the way that the easiest way to conceive of it is probably to think about God as the grand author of the story and its setting, and he gives us the privilege of being co-authors in time, something like that. And so that's where our participation comes in. And the first thing that we kind of want to do is give a framework for what the story and its significance would be. The first thing that we were going to talk about is the idea of being in one place and going to another, right? And Gerritt can expound on this a little bit when in his own way, but I think the easiest way to kind of think about it is, let's say every story is made of a simple kind of framework. I'm at place A, I'd like to get to place B, and something happens in between that either stops me wholesale, interrupts and creates an obstacle that I have to overcome, or helps me along the way that makes the journey easier. But it's the journey that makes up the story, something like that. And thinking about what it would mean for God to be the author for this is that ultimately he's in the place of jurisdiction to decide what the end goal should be. The place where you're going has in it something like a grand purpose. And ultimately this is like the opposite of nihilism. It's expecting that the world itself is actually really purposeful and very meaningful, and everything you do matters. And so it bears with it a great deal of responsibility, and it can be kind of difficult to think about all at once. But I think it's so worthwhile to be able to really just engage life as though it were on purpose, something like that. So,
Sure.
Gerritt, how would you bring out a little bit more about the idea of going?
It's a great question.
When I say the word going, how does that map out for you?
Well, geez, in a lot of ways, right? I mean, fundamentally, every story I've ever read, every movie I've ever watched, all of those are people going places. It's about where you are and where you want to be. And all of life is fundamentally about where you are and where you want to be. And that is a story of going. Every story. The Lord of the Rings is a great one. I'm a fan. Not as big of a fan as some people, but I'm a fan. Right? They are going somewhere. They have a very specific mission, and they have that mission for very particular reasons, nested within what they deem to be valuable. And fundamentally, I think that is if you want to take a step back and look at life at a high level, I think that is fundamentally the story of life. We are going places. And if you're not going places, you don't feel very good. And psychologically, you could say you feel a sense of purposelessness, to feel like you don't know where you are or you don't know where you're going. It would be something akin to being in exile or something like that. Your map doesn't fit in this space. In fact, you don't even have a map because you don't know where you're going. And this is disorienting. It's can feel like you're drowning, right? And so having that story that you know where you're going and you know where you are and you know roughly how to get there, It's fundamentally every single aspect of life and every version of that story, because these exist at multiple realities and they scale up and down at every level of reality you can imagine. Those stories which you choose to participate in say something about the value and how you seek after it.
I want to stop there for just like 2 seconds and point out that we are only a few minutes in, and what we just tapped into is something that at the time I didn't realize, but now is really obvious, that this is like explaining, I think, in a very reasonable way, the structure of, let's say, the spiral upward out of a depressive cycle. Because for me, noticing when I have, let's say, those low points, when I have that feeling where I'm dropping back down into a low place mentally, let's say, where I know that anybody who's listening to this that has experienced depression in a real way knows what I mean by you kind of have divots, let's say. When you experience that lower place, let's say, oftentimes what you're experiencing is the lack of what Gerritt just laid out. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where you are. And everything is less than clear. You're not entirely sure of what story you inhabit, let alone what one you should inhabit. And so noticing this sort of reverse engineering process, I think would be really, really valuable in that arena as well. As somebody who's experienced those things enough times to know, this is something that is made explicit now. When we first did this conversation, I was not as aware of how impactful being aware of this is when you're in that low place and you need to come out.
If I could add,
yeah.
Oh, okay. So I want to add a little bit to this point as well, because it's so profound, and I wasn't expecting you to say that, to be honest. So
fair enough.
No, but it's so important because in a lot of ways it's kind of like, I, just to be clear, do not suffer from depression very often. I mean, if anything, maybe a handful of times in my life, where you feel really overwhelmed. And so if what I'm about to say is wrong, Josh, please do not let me err in this way, okay? But if I can remember, it reminds me of the story of Peter walking on the water a bit, because there's a sense in which Peter's guided by a story at first, right? Which is the Lord calls out to him and says, come to me. And harnessing the power of that, he obeys in faith and embodies that story, and he's walking on the water until he's captured by the power of the wind. Obviously the waves are probably roaring. I believe the text just references the wind, but he starts focusing on the wind, and he begins to sink, and the water and the chaos begins to drown him. And I know it's like a downward spiral. Vervaeke talks about this as like a downward spiraling insight cascade. And what you need in that moment is someone else. And we talked about this on our Inside Out episode that we did like a month ago, that what you need is a community. What you need is someone to pull you out from the spiral, to step in and help you redirect your attention, or help you realize that one of the elements you're struggling through in the spiral isn't true. Like even that is enough to maybe jostle you out of it. It's like to bring in a disruptive event to re-grab the person's attention and reform or refound it into the story, which is going to pull you back up above the water, right? Which is basically what happens to Peter, right? He's sinking, he's panicking, but he looks back to Christ, and Christ grabs his hand and pulls him back above the water, right? So it's this beautiful. It's a beautiful, and I think is that if that's accurate, there you go again. Here you have, and you could imagine not having the story of Peter walking on the water in your life, and the power of having that story in that moment being repeated to you to help afford that disruptive moment, but also B, to repoint you back up where the cascading downpour of negative insights that are cascading can be redirected and start cascading back up and spiraling up towards the goal of the story itself. And there's and so much of this isn't just opinion, right? So there's this guy named Angus Fletcher. He's the director of story science at the University of Ohio's narrative science. I guess, I don't know if he's still there. I listened to this conversation from 2021, I think. He was being interviewed by Jordan Peterson, but this guy does narrative science. He had claimed that it was the world's leading narrative science think tank. This think tank at the University or Ohio State. And he talks about story in this way. He says, I actually wrote this down a while because I'm a little bit of a nerd and I wrote a paper on it. But he actually says this in the conversation. He says, regarding the impact on emotions, he says that we as humans are able, through plotting and planning, right? The idea is, you're very good at looking into the future because we have the ability to do that, to foresee, project, image a future that we either do or don't want, right? But he says we are able, through plotting and planning, to imagine a future. Realize, I believe, Angus Fletcher is also a pretty staunch atheist. He actually, at least he makes that point fairly well in the video that I saw. But he says this regardless, that because we're able to imagine a future which is distinct from the present, and that picture creates desire or fear or all of these other emotions. And so narrative and emotions just go together completely in human experience. So here you have this very qualified person talking about this, that the story actually is imperative to how you feel, to your motivations, to everything about you as you navigate life, that the story that you are operating with controls those things and informs those things. And so to be unaware of the story guiding your or guiding your life, it can be a dangerous place to be in.
I agree. And I think that it's very apt to think about the sinking experience. And what a remarkable thing it is that the first thing both of our brains do when we start talking about something serious is to jump right into a story. How appropriate that is. I think that when we start to look something like this in the face, it starts to become more clear. But when you're in that state, let's say that low point, things being clear is kind of, for whatever reason, it's very difficult to bring yourself to care about things being clear sometimes. And so I think being aware of the fact that when you don't care, you cease to look forward, right? When you forget the future is when you sin the most. And so noticing those tendencies, this is one of those things that I find to be very powerful, right? It's very, very powerful. Like a blessed interruption, like you were talking about earlier, the thing that interrupts from the outside. Recognizing and being able to see my children and my wife and my career and my friendships and my family and my church family as something like the story ongoing that I am nested in, rather than the sea that I'm drowning in. It's a very different perspective shift, and it's something that can make me very grateful in a way where I'm normally feeling very overwhelmed, and so that perspective shift is much more powerful than we often give it credit for. So that was pretty much what I wanted to point out from that, because hearing that again, it's very striking how, as you said that the first time, I'm sitting there, silently nodding my head and so forth when you said that the first time in this recording, and now listening to it quite some time later, recognizing like, oh, you just said a whole lot more than I heard when you said it. But,
there's another guy, Hirschfield. So this is a paper, I think, from 2011. Hirschfield was a guy, he was captured by this idea of this vision of yourself, this future vision of yourself, this story, right? This future imagination that you can participate in that helps control your current perspective, he did an experiment that's fascinating. It was basically, can you get people to save for retirement? And what he found was you could come in with a really profound presentation stating all the facts about why it's a good idea, all the facts about what happens if you don't, and come into very intelligent, well-educated folks, and come back in 6 months and find that not a single one of them has started saving for retirement because the facts don't get you there. Okay. But if you go through an exercise with a group of those folks where you, and there was reasons why. So a couple of the reasons why people wouldn't move towards this goal that they discovered was because people didn't like the idea of thinking about themselves as kind of older, maybe needing to be taken care of. And so, you have this vision of the future that you actually don't want to participate in. So you don't participate with that future vision. Back to Josh's point about, so what he also found was that if you could coach that person into a positive view of themselves into the future, the likelihood of them participating with that future version of themselves climbed exponentially. And as a separate corollary, there's another exercise that Jordan Peterson, when he was a college professor, talks about a lot, where he talked about, he would basically have his students come in and their midterm was to write their biography. And then the final was to write what they wanted in the next 5 years. And what he was able to uncover, congruent with Hirschfield's work, is that the more clear they articulated that picture of where they want to be, directly correlated with them moving towards that goal. So I find this fascinating as we talk about this, because, again, you come back to the Christian life where you have this amazing story of being born in the image of God, being called to his likeness. And this is a story that's going to just continually pull you forward. And if you can see it's like how John says it in the book of John, right? We don't know what will be when he appears, but we know that we'll be like him. And to have that as a driving force in your life, to be holy like Christ, to be Christ-like, what a beautiful image to pull yourself into. And I know that's not going to be the case everywhere. Not, it's a double-edged sword. Some people respond well to the gospel and some people don't. But to have this picture and this image that we can call people forward to at such a high level is, I think, so critical. And if I could frame the rest of our conversation with this, just hit me, not just hit me, but it's something I've thought about in the past, which is, in the modern West, we think about apologetics in a lot of ways with the certain logical, deductive argument that we think is going to get someone to move the needle, and it doesn't. That kind of argumentation will not work. What does the Bible say? It says the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, not a bunch of facts that you can use in a well-reasoned argument. It's the gospel. It's the story of Jesus Christ and how he became king, right? So I just want to reiterate that, and then again highlight the fact that even from these other sources, Hirschfeld, who's doing work in, I believe at the time it was artificial general intelligence, right? This is it all comes together in this form. That story is how we perceive the world. It's not an option. You cannot escape it. It's there, whether it's conscious or not. And so it's best to be aware, for sure.
I agree. All right, I think we're ready to move forward.
Let me ask you guys this real quick. Not trying to get off subject at all, but you both said the word, and I want to, and since Gerritt, you were an atheist, recently even. Well, no, you said what, about a decade?
Yeah.
Okay. So a while back. So Josh, you said purpose, and Gerritt, you said purposelessness, right? And we've all experienced this feeling of, I don't know where I'm going. To be honest, I don't know where I'm at, right? We've all been there, so to say, right? But I want to ask you guys this. Do you think there can be purpose in a universe with no God?
There can be proximal purpose, like a temporal kind of purpose. I can have a short-term goal that,
but not what like you guys are describing.
If I may take a shot at this, I think it's something like you can participate in all kinds of stories as an atheist. Atheists do it every day. I did it as a student. I was going places, right? That was participating in that story as a student. It's something like perhaps you don't have the proper value hierarchy as you seek out this story and you follow this path. And let's say the journey you desire, right, is something like infused by the spirit of truth or love or something like that, because there are stories you can participate in that you don't travel that kind of road. And so and not to say that's what atheists do. I don't think that's true. Atheists are fathers, they're sons, they're daughters and mothers and they're leaders, right?
Right.
So they can participate, but there is an element that's missing that is very important, because without the element of what we're going to talk about later, being the image of God, you are, let's say, placing stories out of order. And if you don't have them nested correctly, they run out. And I think this is really important. There are finite stories and there are infinite stories. And Joshua said it at the beginning, the journey is what matters. Once you get there, satisfaction feels great. But soon you start to forget where you are and where you're going. And if you are going nowhere, and life is fundamentally about going, you begin to feel hopeless and purposelessness. And
Man, is that not exactly what we were just talking about? How incredible. How incredible. You just mentioned something crucial that I think we should probably expound on, which is finite and infinite stories. Let's say what we're looking at there, to be more explicit, are things that are, let's say, proximal, immediate goals versus things that are long-lasting drives and trajectories. What I mean by that is specifically that when I'm a young boy, I'm on a trajectory to become a man. But when I'm a young boy, I'm eating breakfast and I'm going to play outside and I'm eating lunch and I'm going to go inside. I'm going to do some homework, I'm going to eat dinner, I'm going to take a bath, and I'm going to go to bed. Those are all proximal, small, immediate narratives, goals, frames from one to another, stages, let's say, progressive moments in series, let's say. But each of them has an end point. You can kind of zoom in and out at any level of resolution between those contrasts. The ultimate playable, non-ending story, the only permanent and genuine infinite narrative that would be relevant in the most ultimate sense, is to properly image God. I would say that is, in our context, if we can make the right emphasis, that's the connection that was awaiting discovery at this point, is the connection between those two things, is to say the infinite story for any one of us is in fact to image God rightly. This is an infinite and eternal narrative. It is an absolutely playable forever game, right? That's the ultimate. Everything else that we can have a narrative for, a genuine framework from A to B, and it doesn't matter what it is, literally anything else can be nested in this. And the things that we find in our lives and in our experiences, in our temptations, that do not map into the story of being a proper image of God are in fact things that will cause you to falsely image God. By definition, to sin. So any narrative pattern that you've noticed in yourself, let's say habits is what we tend to call them, hang-ups, addictions, let's say, time wasters, doom scrolling, whatever it is, those kind of things that you notice that do not fit into the narrative of you being a proper image of God. That's the story, right? On the, let's say, individual level, that's the story. On a communal level, it would be to be invested in the body, right? To communally participate in the life of the image. Let's say the Christ is the image. And so beyond the individual, the community participates in a narrative, and that ultimate, unending, infinite narrative is the body of Christ. Agree, disagree? What do you think, Gerritt?
I think it's beautiful. I might push a little bit that there are other infinite stories. In fact, largely you'll find those in religious circles. So other religions would also, not all religions have that kind of infinite story that draws you into eternity, right? And there's even iterations of this that are a little bit different, right? So there are Christian presentations of the infinite story that aren't actually infinite. Like the resolution is in eternity, but once you get there, you're like crystallized and you don't grow anymore. And one of the things I really love about some of the things I've learned from studying the Christian East and Orthodox Christianity is the reality that, it's kind of like taking Paul's words about being transformed from glory to glory, that goes on into eternity as we behold the face of Christ and participate with the heavenly tabernacle, right? Like with the cloud of witnesses and all of that. It's going to change us into eternity as we continue to image God more closely. I mean, he's perfect. We're not, we're going to see him as he is. But this is this eternal process. So not only do we does Christianity situate the end goal outside of the here and now, it also encourages you to participate in that story in the here and now. And the promise is this constant upward look to Christ, who is perfect. And so we will always be approaching that perfection as we commune and co-rule with Christ into eternity. So I love this idea. And you said it so beautifully and articulately. There's so many finite games. Any little goal I want to have is a finite game, right? So if I want to, pick something, I don't know, pick a worldly thing. Like I want to buy a really fancy car, or, goodness, that I want my son to pray more often, right? Any of those are somewhat finite stories. And the danger, or at least the piece of it that becomes dangerous, is there's also a bit of like a middle version of this in my mind. So as I explore the finite and the infinite, I feel like there are stories that are somewhat in between. And these would be stories that call us toward what seem like finite goals, but actually in reality are something more of an infinite goal. And so these stories, being neither finite or infinite, but more like some kind of hybrid monster, I believe are heavily used by the enemy and the principalities and powers to build for themselves bodies amongst the idolatrous sea that we kind of all live in. Right, because the takeaway about having an improper value hierarchy is to suggest you're aiming at the wrong God. And we didn't talk about this, but there's this conversation that Jonathan Pageau gave at the ARC conference where he asked the question, what is the good? And there's some good jokes aside about how they gave him the easy topic, what is the good? But he expresses it in this very fundamental way. And so if I could, I want to articulate this a little bit, but I need to pull in one more piece of work, which is this concept called relevance realization by John Vervaeke. So modern 4E cognitive science, right? The way we see things, the way we actually perceive things, we don't, Peterson said it well. He said, we don't see objects and infer meaning. We see meaning and infer objects. And that's fundamentally true at a cognitive level. Okay. So like if I have to go to the bathroom right now, right, I am going to see everything in between me and that bathroom as an obstacle, right? I won't actually see it as a door. I see it as an obstacle I have to open to get to the bathroom, right? Or the chair I'm sitting on is, I don't even really notice it while I'm talking until I say it. And my mind it's like, wiggle your big toe. Now everyone's saying big toes, right? But, in some sense, it's irrelevant to me right now because it's just an affordance for me to have this conversation. But if there was a zombie horde outside of my door, it would become a weapon. Right. So it's not actually the chair that I see. I don't see this, And what would I see if I saw the chair? I would see legs. I would see maybe a place to sit. But see, that's the point. I see a place to sit. I don't see a chair, if that makes sense, right? I call it a chair because it's a place to sit. And so what we see, and this is Vervaeke's point about relevance realization, what we aim at controls what gets revealed to our mind as relevant. Our mind is foregrounding and backgrounding all the time because there's too many details. Okay, and this was some of the work they found in artificial intelligence. Vervaeke talks about this, that they thought that would be the easy thing to do, is get the machine to see the world. And they actually found out that that's incredibly difficult because the amount of information it has to process is, he uses the frame or the word combinatorial explosion. There's multiplicity and complexity, and it's all moving in this dynamic way all the time. And so it's actually almost impossible to get the machine to see the world because there's too much information. So how did they solve it? Well, surprise, surprise, they looked at how the human mind does it. And the human mind is not looking at all of the details. It's not. No. It is by story and aim, filtering out and shining forth. And so all of our perceptions, all of them, are driven by story. We're not always conscious of the story guiding those perceptions. So now we come back to Pageau. Pageau talked about this hierarchy of values, because it doesn't matter who you are. Somebody I work with, who I respect very much, brilliant person, really staunch atheist, and sometimes at corporate lunches, this person and I have conversations about this, and will often say things like, everything in my life is based on science. I do everything I do based on science. And so one day I just asked this person straight up, I said, why'd you get out of bed this morning? There's no scientific answer for that, right? The reason why this person gets out of bed is because they want to go to work. Why do they want to go to work? Because they want to earn money. Why do they want to earn money? So they can take care of their spouse. Why do they want to take? This begins to fold, and this is that nested structure of value we talk about. Well, at some point, the buck stops at what is the highest value. And this is important, and this is what Pageau talks about. This is that thing that sits at the highest value acts as an organizing principle for every value underneath it. And if it's that aim and that organizing principle that's controlling what you see or don't see, that means the highest value in your system can act in some sense, especially if it's the wrong ordering of the hierarchy, as an idol. It is like your God. And so if God is not at the top, then you have, by definition, an idol guiding your life. And if it's an idol guiding your life who does not care about you, it doesn't care about you, it will destroy you just so it can be around or be alive or have its moment in the sun, right? But to be guided by an idol is to have 100% of your relevance realization, your perceptions, tyrannized and askewed by that idol. Josh, you mentioned addiction. What a great example of something that can tyrannize your perceptions, right? You can talk to a brilliant person who is a drug addict, and they can give you the most complex, amazing, logical progression to how to look, find, and source drugs, and why they need them, and why all of the people talking to them don't understand what it's like. Because the addiction has tyrannized the relevance realization. They cannot even see how it's relevant outside of the worldview because they're blind to it. And this is why you come all the way back to Hirschfeld. This is why the facts don't get you there, because the facts don't shine forth. What you need is a different story to highlight the relevant facts differently, or different facts in a more relevant way. And so you come all the way back to, it's the gospel that's the power of God unto salvation, the story of how Jesus Christ became king. This is what people need to hear in the world today, right? Because, well, I won't keep going into that, but there you go. So again, we come this full circle view to have an improper story guiding your life, and worse, when you don't know which ones are guiding your life, you leave yourself open to the idolatry controlling your life. And especially in the modern Western world, with all of the technology and all of the platform and all of the narratives being pumped into everybody's palm every day through their phone, now you have these things. And again, it's not infinite, but it's not finite, like climate change, right? And now listen, I'm a big believer that we need to be very good stewards of the earth. I think oftentimes we don't understand how fine of a balance all this operates on. And, we need to be responsible as good stewards. But climate change is something like a finite story because you imagine there's a solution. But it's kind of also like an infinite story because everybody kind of has to get on board or we're never going to get there. And in that gray area without clarity, I think is where this is at some level, this precise thought is something I'm kind of hitting real time. It's where they operate. They operate in the gray. Mm-hmm. Because in the gray, you don't exactly know what you're aiming at. So they can come in and give you a ordering principle for your life for you to participate in. So you pick any social justice category, it's going to hit this. I think it's going to hit this box pretty profoundly. And it explains then this idolatrous tyranny over your life, over your choices. And, it does not care about you like Christ does. And that's important, right? For any of these major initiatives, you're just a mouthpiece for them to advance their agenda. Whereas for Christ, he's actually coming to build you into the person God wants you to be.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very different thing. And that person is communal and loving. And so there's this big difference between the two. And I think that's a beautiful juxtaposition between the false idols and the principalities and powers and the Lord Jesus Christ.
Two things that I would want to add to that. First of all, that's exactly why you're on this episode and the last episode, because thank you. That was fantastic. One, for the chat, I'm going to post in the chat, and probably if you can remind me, everyone, I'll post in the description. Dane Van Ace and I did a review of the conversation or of the presentation that he's talking about that Jonathan Peugeot did on the greatest good, defining the good. So that's here. Check it out in the chat. You should be able to click on that. If not, copy paste it. If you can't do that, just go to the Cosmic Corner playlist and scroll around. You'll find it. It's there. That was a really, really fantastic presentation, and Peugeot did a great job. The second thing that I wanted to add to that was actually where you talked about in the infinite story, the finite story, and the gray area. The gray area is not only, I think, Satan's favorite playground because it gives us the aptitude for moral gratification, but doesn't give us any of its actual telos, right? Where you're not in a trajectory. That's why it's finite, is because the trajectory is not leading you upward. It's leading you at best at a plateau. And so you're not really achieving. You're just participating in something that this is, forgive me for loving poetry, but there's a band that I love called My Epic. And in one of their songs, they said, there's 1,000 joys that show me home, but never let me stay. And those are the kind of things that, as you notice, there are things, like you said, that are worthwhile goals that are from before me, they'll be after me. And for all practical purposes in relation to my life, it's an infinite, as in unending, I'll end first kind of game. That does not mean that it is the eternal trajectory that it sometimes fronts itself to be. It needs to be baptized and nested into the actual infinite story in order to participate properly in being that trajectory. And so if it's not integrated and nested into that actual infinite story, then it ceases to be the springboard by which that you go from glory to glory, as you said earlier. And so I think that's where it kind of nests itself in what we're talking about. That's why it's so relevant, but it's difficult to kind of place where it is, because in relation to eternity, those are all finite games. But in relation to one's own life, they seem unending. And so we are willing to kind of give them our attention and our allegiance and participate in them, because they do, in the long run, seem to be very worthwhile. I'm reminded of, let's say, some of the stories that people would tell about, the explorer going across the ocean and finding a new land and so forth, and the exploration and the pioneer narrative that kind of recurs itself in many different stories, not only from actual historical stories like Lois and Clark, but also things like Star Trek, right? two of the exact same kind of story, but very, very different from one another. And yet inside both of them, you kind of have the sneaking suspicion that noticing one side of the story is not enough. If you notice both sides of a pioneer myth or an explorer myth, what you actually have is the other half of that is conquest and the loss of the other. The person who is already inhabiting that newfound land, their narrative and experience is going to be quite contrasted from the pioneer's contrast, right? And so those two polar opposite experiences happening in the same narrative is why a pioneer myth is not the one. It's not the narrative. You participate in it and it can have a good, it's a good thing, but it has to be nested in something else or you'll become a tyrant conqueror. And this is the same thing as like a marriage, right? As a man, I have a wife. A perfect wife is perfectly submitted, and a perfect man is perfectly guiding and loving and protecting. Since neither of us are perfect, there's an imbalance that kind of naturally occurs, right? But in order to have submission that is not slavery and leadership that is not tyranny, you need that mutual. Both stories need to be in the same place for the same reason, right? I don't get to be the leader if she does not submit, and she does not submit if I am not a leader. And that's why it's the feedback loop that it is. That's why it becomes a trajectory, right? That's one of the reasons why it works so well. That's I'll leave it there because I don't want to repeat, but that was what I think kind of packages the thing a little bit more neatly with what we've already gone over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it was brilliantly articulated, and I would just clarify again, or at least reinforce that we're not talking about the fact that these other goods aren't good, and this is kind of what Peugeot gets at in his presentation. It's not that these things aren't good; it's that they've been misordered, and because they're misordered, they misappropriate more than they should, right? So sexual reproduction, it's literally one of the commands of God: be fruitful, multiply. Okay, but if that kind of activity becomes the most important thing in your life, it's going to destroy you, right? You become a sex addict, or Lord only knows. Okay, but this is the point: is that goods are good. Eating, we have to eat. It's how God kind of made us, right? But you can misorient eating as a good, right? And then that will also destroy you. So goods taken out of order tyrannize and destroy. And that's the important thing. Whereas what Josh was saying is that when they're rightly integrated in the proper aim, that can actually afford that integration. See, when you have tyrant through an idol, you can't afford integration across the infinite set of things that exist in the world. But with the right one, you can. You can rightly integrate and conquer, not in a way that leaves it behind an assault of the earth kind of dust format, but more of like in the way what we see in the history of the church is it went forth and conquered various areas and cultures. It doesn't destroy it and replace it. Integrates, transforms, and offers back to God something beautiful.
Amen. Amen. Fantastic. I think we're ready to hop back in. All right.
And that would be my ultimate concern about that version of or that side of the house, let's say, right? Is you can ground that purpose in the stories you live in. So I am a father, we're fathers. There is a heavy sense of purpose in being a father, walking that road from.
Just to remind everybody, the question Tyler had asked was, can an atheist participate in these same types of narratives? That's why we're answering the way that's what Gerritt's talking about now, just to
and
give
have
everybody
meaning and purpose. Yeah,
right.
And have meaning and purpose, right?
They have meaning and purpose, and they can live in the gray area, but they cannot obtain the trajectory.
Where we are with our kids to where we want to be with our kids, what we want them to be. And that is a story fundamentally of not just us going, but us going and taking our kids with us. And the participation along that journey will transform both of us. So
sure,
I think that's true. But again, there's an orienting principle that you could say for the map you're using to make this journey. And that orienting principle is something like the ground of truth, right?
Right,
So
right.
Yeah.
not having it leads to challenges.
I think
Absolutely.
it's probably something like knowing that there is a highest good, so that you have something to aim. There has to be something above you in order to progress. You can't
Right.
be
There
the
it is.
height of all creation. You can't, like, obviously I'm not self-sufficient. I didn't birth myself, and one day I'm going to die and the world's going to keep spinning. So I'm not the main character of the story, right?
Right.
If that's the case, then there has to be something beyond myself that can inform me of where it is that we're supposed to be going. Ultimately, that is the purpose of the story, is to find out where the goal is, so that you can have the highest possible aim, so that you can have a proper let's say, like, if you want to think about it as a ladder, like the thing that's at the top of the ladder is the place where you ultimately want to be. And if the thing that's at the top of the ladder is, let's say, money, then that's going to inform everything that you see around you as to what you think is important or valuable. And those things are going to stand out to you in a way that other things cannot, because you've placed that at the top of your values. Whatever's at the top of your values is going to instruct and inform those things that are below it, right? And so having the highest good at the top of your values, the highest good for us as theists would be God, obviously, right? So if God is at the top of the ladder, God is where I'm trying to go, then that's going to inform everything about not only the proximal small scale stories that I'm participating in moment to moment, but also the grander scale of my entire life has purpose and meaning, simply because there's something beyond my own fancy and my own subjective experience of things that can inform me of that higher value, to tell me this is a goal. No, you don't get to make it up as you go. And if you try, it won't work, because you're finite and you don't know everything and you can't see everything. And so there has to be something beyond us that informs us of that end goal. And that end goal, being God, ends up being something where every step we take toward him ends up something that can have a power beyond just saying, oh, I've taken a step forward. It's that you've left the place you were, you've come to a new place, and in the new place you find a new version of yourself, and it's in Christian terms that would be something like sanctification or transformation. And we're in the story that we're playing out, even moment to moment, we're trying to transform things, especially ourselves, because if you recognize that, like me, by myself, I'm insufficient, and so I need other people, but I also need the best version of myself. But I don't think I'm ever going to get there by myself. If I'm going to aim high, it has to be a community endeavor. It's going to be something that we do together. And so coming together with the two things that we have so far is the framework of a story. I'm here, I want to be there, right? The question is, why would you want to be there? That's informed by something that you place at the top of your values. And for the hold the phone. Okay, hold on. This is in my head now. Okay, if anybody in the last month or so has watched the conversation that Dr. Peterson had with Dawkins on the Cosmic Skeptic channel on YouTube, or I
Great
guess it's not
conversation.
Cosmic Skeptic anymore, but on Alex's channel, he had Dr. Peterson and Richard Dawkins come together and talk, and this was their main hang-up right here. Is Peterson couldn't get Dawkins for the life of him to admit, until Peterson used his own, like Dawkins' own work, to make the point. He would not acknowledge. He just said, "Oh, it's not interesting to me." No, he would not acknowledge the point that you need a reason why you're aiming there. Why would you want to be there? He says, "I'm only interested in scientific truths." Why are you saying that? Did science inspire that moral claim? Or is it merely your personal fancy? Because there's no reason for you to be this adamant about Peterson taking a similar stance if this is just your own fancy being tickled. But you're saying this like it's a moral imperative that he should be concerned about truth, as you are. Why are you concerned about truth? Why have you inherited this aim? From what? Not from science. Evolution has never lended itself for creatures to be truth finders, only survivors, only reproducers. You are missing huge gaps, my friend, between the merely biological level and this kind of thing, where you have a trajectory, again, a trajectory, but not only a trajectory that's by default upward, because that's a lot of weird things that have come in through like a scientific lens. Travis was on Real Seekers recently and was talking about narrative, and he made a really fantastic point about the fact that even in some of the most mundane things we have now, if you've ever been to jury duty, you know that the person who tells you the best story wins the court case, don't he? You know that's true. You know that's true. The scientist that has the theory that can fit everything, that tells the story, gets the funding. You know that's true. Everybody knows that's true. Gerritt is in the corporate world enough to know that when you have a plan, you have a business plan. Boy, if you can't articulate that into a story, the boardroom's going to laugh you out of stock because some other dude has a great story. And even if you had the better plan, it doesn't matter. You need the better story. We need the better story. The answer to why do you want to be there is actually more crucial than it seems at first. So I didn't want to let that pass without pointing that out.
Well, let's camp for just a minute, because
okay.
Not only do I work in the corporate world, but I'm something of a leader in the corporate world, or at least in my company, right? So I'm a senior director of finance, a lofty title. Basically, I basically report to the CFO and the executive committee. So what I know is that leadership is 100% story. All leadership. A good leader communicates a vision and inspires others to get on the bus. Okay? Because the leader cannot do all the work, right? We need a body of people that we can collect the attention towards a single goal, and with that distributed cognition, move the company towards its purpose and vision. So I actually just had we just had a big anniversary event where I just stand up in front of everybody and talk about something financy. So I talked about a process called resource allocation, which is fundamentally a story of faith and trust about setting a vision, a North Star that you're going to believe in as a company. And when I say you have faith in it, I don't mean like you say that. I mean, you start pouring money towards it. Okay. So you take it's faith in the traditional sense, not the modern Western sense, right? It's
devoted to the
trust,
attack,
embodied action, right? You start moving towards it. You lean forward, right? And then everybody comes around. I also got to talk about toppling giants and dragons in that as a closing comment to a room full of corporate folks and a bunch of board members. It was a ton of fun. But all this to say, so even in the corporate world, story is everything in terms of moving companies forward. When you get back into the Peterson, I would encourage everybody to go listen to the conversation with Peterson and Dawkins. It is a profound real life example of the challenge of bringing story back to the modern West. We are, and I don't know this, okay, I'm no expert here, okay, but we are, for lack of a better phrase, a entire culture built off like post-Protestant Christianity coming over from the Western Enlightened mind. Okay, so we are very focused on the details. We are very focused on each tiny particular thing. And, you know, today we just call that materialism at the high level, that there is actually nothing, that there's nothing but the biology. There's nothing but the tiny detail. This is the kind of conversation that Peterson and Dawkins get into. Peterson's continually trying to pull Dawkins back to the side of story, but Dawkins is stuck on, he's looking at the bark on the tree, or the ant crawling on the bark on the tree. And Peterson's trying to remind him that he's in a forest. Right. But he can't do it. He's missing the forest for the trees. There's a guy named, what is his name? Ian McGilchrist. He wrote 2 books, one called The Master and His Emissary, and the other, I think it's called What's the Matter with Things, or something like that. Now, to be clear, I have not read either of these books, but I've listened to him talk about both of these works for hours with qualified people that he's engaged with. So I'm going to comment a little bit on the topics. But what he talks about in Master and His Emissary, and a lot of us in the pop culture sense are familiar with this, is the idea of a right-brained person or like a left-brained person. And the left-brained person is going to be very focused on things, mechanical, like how things, what is this thing, right? They're very good at aiming at something really particular, like a developer, someone doing a ton of code, right? They're doing all logic. That's very left brain dominant. The right brain dominant is not like that. It's very story focused, right? And oftentimes it gets conflated as well as one of the fundamental distinctions between the way male and female brains operate. Whereas males are more left brain dominant. You know, you could think about, you know, if you want to just back up for a second, you could think about trying to throw a spear at something really far away, right? You got to really aim at a tiny detail, right? Whereas, you know, you could imagine in a more agrarian society, right, as a lady, you got to have a super broad level of awareness. You're not trying to aim at a spear throw. You're trying to make sure that there's food over there and that kid's not crying and something else is going on over here. So you get this broad sense of awareness, this story form sense of awareness. And McGilchrist makes the point that what's happened in the West is, as a culture, we've become left brain dominant. All we're doing is talking about the details now. But as a post, you know, not a post, but let's say as a Protestant Christian export out of Rome in the West, we've carried with it this focus on the details. And not only that, but because we're a Protestant culture, a post-Protestant culture, whatever you want to call it today, we have this like inherent quality of suspicion now. Don't trust the tradition. Don't trust the story. Don't trust the narrative. Right. And so what you have here is basically Dawkins, the entire conversation, be like, that's all nonsense anyway. Until Peterson gets at the end to use his own work to show how story is guiding the selection process, to which Dawkins replies, well, now that is interesting. Gotcha. Right? Welcome back aboard. And it's not some gotcha question. I mean, it's Peterson actually trying to arrive at a higher place that they can have a dialogue and have real dialogue and generate wisdom together, because together they would be great. But Dawkins is fighting it, doesn't want to participate, too suspicious of the story, right? So it's just really fascinating that all that it takes place at all of those levels. And then it folds itself up in such a perfect embodiment in that dialogue. So again, I would encourage everyone to go listen, because it's actually fascinating.
Absolutely. I second that. If you haven't listened to that, as soon as we're done here, you should go and check that out or put it on your watch list or whatever. Don't miss out. That was a really great one. But yeah, we'll hop back in because we got a long way to go. Atheist, the thing that they place at the top of their values is completely arbitrary. And for the Christian, it's the opposite. It's anything but arbitrary. It's so centrally focused that it's easy to define almost, you know? And so seeing that's the thing that's at the top, that's the thing that's going to guide those parts of the story that jump out at me and shine forth and make themselves relevant to my goal.
You know, it brings the statement that Jesus made, you've seen me, you've seen the Father. It makes that statement a lot more powerful, a lot more practical even. It's sobering, right? Because here's the thing. That's why Jesus came. We talked about this, you know, kind of last week and the week before, about Jesus being the archetype, Jesus being the example of what we're supposed to be. We're little Christ. And to see that connection, he literally came down, connected us to the Father, right? He's the connection. He's the mediator between heaven and earth. And so it just, again, that statement just popped into mind. You've seen me, you've seen the Father. I mean, like I said, it was a couple weeks back on CSG, we should be able to see, you've seen me, you've seen the Holy Spirit, right? Like, just think about how that would work. But I think that, you know, kind of getting back on the narrative structure, we've talked about this off air, Josh, about how people, this Christian or not Christian, atheist, Muslim, Hindu, it doesn't matter. We all recognize symbols, archetypes, and just settings within a scene, within the narrative, within a story. This is one way in which we all worldwide as a people, as the human race, could connect, could come together, is through story, through narrative, right? Josh, do you want to hit on that a little bit more and kind of expound on where I'm going? We've had this conversation a lot, bro, and I think it would benefit our listeners to hear just exactly how we can connect through story.
I think that the connection is almost exactly what I was laying out before, that if I'm going to aim at something higher than myself and I want to actually go anywhere in achieving it, I need to be able to have higher values than myself. And in order to achieve those things, since I'm not the best version of myself, I'm always going to need help. And so in general, even by default, to aim at a high order good is going to be a community endeavor. It always will be. And so aiming together, pointing our attention together at something common gives us a unity, right? And under that unity, we can perform multiple functions toward the same goal and achieve more than we ever could have by ourselves.
It gives us something to work to.
This is funny because you actually sparked in me the memory of a quote that I heard from Maddie Montgomery, the vocalist from For Today.
Yeah,
who's actually a preacher. He said, if you want to go fast, you can go alone. If you want to go far, you'll go together. And that's why we might feel like other people are holding us back or slowing us down, but that might just be a lesson in patience. There's something to be said about the kind of leave no man behind thing that you see in military cases. It's like that kind of devotion and allegiance toward one another and toward the goal is something that can't be replaced by anything other than a real unity. It's just I don't think that you can get it anywhere else. But what you said specifically about Christ saying, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, that's a perfect segue actually into the second thing that we were going to talk about, which is the idea of emanation from above to down below, and emergence from the base level upward, right? And what we mean by that is something similar to building blocks from the bottom up, or having an enforcement of authority that comes from the top down. Emergence is something where you take, and we were talking about this last night, if you take two hydrogen molecules and one oxygen molecule, one hydrogen molecule and two oxygen molecules, those molecules by themselves are just the elements that they are. But when you combine them, something new occurs, something higher occurs, something with completely new properties is emerging, and we call it water, right? And H2O is the chemical qualifier for what that is. But ultimately, when you look at the difference between two separate molecules, two separate kinds of molecules, and then the combination of them making something brand new, right? Yeah. It's the same thing as if I had an idea and Gerritt had an idea, they were separate ideas, then we come together and collaborate those ideas, something new will emerge, something that couldn't have if we stayed isolated. And so it's also that incentive, to be under unity and aim higher. Like heaven forbid we think we're the best version of ourselves right now. You know what I mean? Right. But before it moves on, anybody who's interested in the top down, bottom up framework we were just talking about, go to the Cosmic Corner playlist and check out the episode about vampires and then the episode about zombies. We used a couple of different narrative devices to explain that in further detail. So go and check that out if you're interested in that specifically.
And if I may, just really quickly for those who don't have time to go watch a whole video while we're doing this, right? So to bring this in, two examples for emanation and emergence, right? So let's come back to a company, because this is right here now and we're familiar with this, right? So a company is a group of people, and think of those people as the potential, right? They are the source of potential for the company, right? But if there's no top-down organizing, motivating, inspiring vision, right? Again, that top-down perspective from the leadership, well, then the company can't actually run anywhere, right? You can imagine if all the cells in your body weren't all in constant communication, you wouldn't be alive, right? The potential would bubble over into chaos and destruction. Similarly, from the other side, what the leadership needs to do, they actually call this in the textbooks, tone from the top. It would be a common thing you get, but the CEO personally sets this with the board of directors. It's the idea of what they want to aim at, how they want to be, how they act, what they do. Like, it is the tone from the top. It's this top-down ordering principle over the potential. And because you have both coming together, you have this thing called a company that has again, it's distributed cognition with collective attention, right? And as a body, like a hyperobject body, not like my body, but a higher order body, that is a person with its own thoughts, its own motivations, its own aims, walking and doing things in the world. That's one example. Here's another one. The story in Genesis, in creation. Earth is a source of potential. That's all it is, though. It's chaos, right? Source of potential. It's and the spirit comes and hovers, flutters over that potential. So you have this bottom-up source of potential. You have this top-down organizing principle, and when the two come together, you get life and beauty. Two quick examples.
Amen. And also, if you're interested in what Gerritt was just talking about with the idea of an ordering principle for a corporation or a business or a club or something like that, what he's talking about is the person at the top needs to embody the spirit of the whole. That's how they inform the rest. In Christianity, the one who is at the top, who is the head, who embodied the spirit of the whole structure, would be the Christ. He's the incarnation. And that's why we participate in his body. He is the head. So insofar as a corporation is successful, they will model a miniature version, a micro narrative of the body. That's how a successful company would run itself. Yes? Is that accurate?
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Fair enough.
Beautiful. And again, it comes back to the dangers. Think about how a leader in a business might embody a improper spirit and what that might do in a powerful modern day company. Okay. Consider.
All right. Oh man, Jamie's throwing jokes in the chat. Washing feet and taking names. Oh man. All right, let's get back into it. Go ahead and just
hold on, if I may, though. If I may.
Can you
this point about washing feet and taking names being a little Jesus, right? That is the point. Okay. It is the point of it's we've said this so many times on the show, but it's those old bracelets. What would Jesus do? Go participate in that story, and Jesus will meet you there, and he will transform you. Because let me tell you something, that is what his body is doing right now. The same thing he did when he was here.
Yes, dude, I love that we're bringing that back. Hashtag WWJD officially. We're bringing it back. It's mine now. All right. Go over a little bit of what we mean by emergence and emanation and how those things actually play out in terms of participation in the story.
Absolutely. So I want to say a couple things. One, the key word in all of this is participation. So if we can leave one word for every single person to take away from this, I want them thinking about participation. Before I talk about emergence and emanation, I want to talk really quickly, Tyler, about the question you asked. Josh, I think it's very important to state that if you are unaware of the reality that you live in narrative structures, you are going to get hijacked by people with agenda who know and understand the power of narrative and use it in our lives. We see this predominant. We see a lot of this today, every day. You see it on narratives are coming at you through the TV. They're coming at you through your phone. They're coming at you through billboards. They're on the radio waves. Everyone is trying to share a story or persuade you into a story. And if you're not familiar with this framework, if you're not familiar with the reality of it, you can get sucked into ideological narratives. It is how we want to say it. And I realize maybe there's some idiots in the world say, hey, look, you have an ideological narrative and you're trying to get people into it as well. We can talk a little bit about that as we go, because I think it's really important. But I wanted to state that up front, that if you aren't familiar with narrative structures, they can be hijacked and leveraged against you as well. And these exist everywhere. A company is a group of people operating according to a narrative with a common goal and distributed cognition shared towards that common attention. Okay, so all of that exists at various levels, and that's one example of it. A development plan in the professional world. I work in the business world. A development plan is literally mapping out where they are and where they're going and how you're going to get them there. And the power of that, from an the applicability and the power of doing that for someone is tremendous. Participation at that level will just transform them. So now we're going to come right back into the emanation. And I love the idea of water, because you have molecules that have these independent properties, nothing like what's in water. Merged together, you get water. It's powerful, but this exists at every level. Tyler, when we were talking about this last night, we mentioned the water thing. The first thing you said, like marriage. Perfect. Marriage is a great example of emergent qualities and emergent consequences. When you are married to your wife, you know your wife. First of all, the relationship you share with your wife transforms both of you into new people over time. And the nature of that participation can have varying results, let's say. But in the most ultimate demonstration of this, the Lord left us something very visible about this. Let's say water molecules. People didn't know about those for a while, right? But when two people come together and a baby emerges, a brand new human being, it is hard to argue against the topic. So it exists at all of these levels. And the extent to which we participate is the extent to which we can see this transformation. We're going to come back to this with the image of God later, but I think that's the core bulk of, if we can talk about emergence, it's about participation. On the other side of this, we have emanation. And so there's a lot of different ways to think about this. But emanation would be something like the guiding principle that comes down and creates structure. And guiding principle is a really good one. It could be intelligence. You can think of it that way as well. But you could also think of it like a company. A CEO designates the mission of the company, and it's a very top-down thing. If the CEO is overly top-down, he will crush the creativity of the company underneath, because he has to have it his way, right? So these two things intersect, and they want to intersect and participate together, because together you get something like the ordinating principle bubbling, fluttering over the potential. And that's how you get the maximal transformation from that perspective, right? So you can imagine there's a blend for a company of the creativity in the people, in the teams, being allowed to create, and you have an ordinating principle directing and creating the goal and the direction of that. Too much, you suppress creativity. If you let the company just bubble up, it'll be chaos, and that'll not end well as well. Right. The balance is critical. And this is something like the narrow road. Everyone has seen a yin yang. That's exactly what this is trying to communicate, is one side in the other. One is emanation, one is emergence. The secret is that narrow line right between.
Right.
It sounds like whenever you get practical with emanation, it sounds like there's a lot of sanctification in that process, right? This is the process, like if Josh and I has been talking about, he uses the term becoming a lot, right? You are becoming like God, like Jesus, as he is, we shall be as well, right? And so is that kind of what I'm hearing, Gerritt?
Absolutely. It's every level of reality this can scale to. I mean, emanation,
Right,
you can
right.
think about it like, to keep it more straightforward for the average person, right? You can think of, well, that's not straightforward for the average person, so I gotta think about that. But, so something like the ionosphere and the stratosphere, all of these things are spheres with.
So I just want to say kudos to Tyler for being able to follow what we were talking about this, because it was a very new idea for him at the time, and it wasn't as easy for us to expound on it as it is now. Tyler did a great job of following. So, Tyler, if you watch this, kudos for that, bro, because that was good. Some of your stuff, Tyler had some good input in this one. He really did.
And spheres in the earth. So the atmosphere has many
Right.
layers. The reality is those layers, spheres within spheres, they pulsate. And it actually causes a frequency to come down onto the surface of the earth called the Schumann cavity resonance. This resonance is actually like an ordering principle for life. So emanation, it's a great example of emanation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And underneath the earth, you can think of as raw potential, raw potential. And you have the ordinating principle fluttering over the earth. Think about Genesis 1. It's a great example of the Holy Spirit fluttering over the void. So you have the ordinating principle fluttering over the potential, you get creation.
And also you can think about it almost like to kind of almost continue with the same idea, is thinking about the way that the sun provides more than just light and heat. It also presents to us photons, which we don't get to use and receive, but plants can. And plants will use the thing that comes from above it and the thing that is below it, both to be like the meeting place of the soil and the sky. Like that's how plants grow. They're planted in the soil. They receive nutrients from below that support them and lift them up and elevate, and they point their face toward the sky where the sun is, and the sun gives them the thing that they use in order to appropriate all the stuff that they're receiving from below. It gives them that the photons is what it's photosynthesis, right? But it's the ability to use the light from the sun in order to process those things that it's receiving from within, right? And it's almost like we receive from God something like the law, right? And from within ourselves, we have passions and desires that would love to be the guiding principle in our lives.
Yeah.
But we put those things in check and we appropriate them by the thing that we received from above, not the thing that we received from below.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
We can appropriate those things that are below by receiving from above. And it's almost the same way as he was talking about a company, right? Where in your example, Tyler, of marriage, right? Where you have, let's say the scripture talks about the man being the head of the wife and Christ being the head of the man, right? And so from the top down, Christ is above, then the man, and then it trickles down to the woman, right? But if we try to think about it as something that only comes from the top down, what we'll have is a tyrannical enforcement that tries to make sure that it has only obedience, right? And if we don't have the true submission from the wife to the husband and from the husband to the Christ, this whole thing will get out of order. You need both. You need from the top down extending. The thing that's above as an authority is looking down in a place of love and provision and guidance, and the thing that's below is yielding to the guidance, receiving the provision, and reciprocating the love. Something like that. That's basically where the space in the middle is where love lives, you know.
That puts
and that's kind of one of those things where when we're participating properly, both with our neighbors and with God, what we're doing is fulfilling the law of grace, like Paul said, by loving. That's what we're doing.
It puts a whole new spin on the passage, love covers a multitude of sins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to view it like that, I absolutely hear what you're saying. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and Gerritt, we've got to have you back on to dive even deeper into this, right? But I know you guys wanted to.
And here
talk
we are
about the
doing that.
image of God, and
Here
how
we are
all
doing
of this
that.
wraps into that. So, Gerritt, if you would like to begin, that we can transition.
I think there's a lot to say here. So I think I want to start right where we left off. Look,
Okay.
First and foremost, as human beings, we are made in the image of God, and I believe every single human being is made in the image of God. I think if we take a step back and we just talk and we look at what we were just talking about, it's really important to realize that as the image of God, we are something like an embodied version of this top down and bottom up all at the same time. We are something like a microcosm of creation. We are the only being that God created to rightly inhabit both the physical world and the potential and the ordinate world from a intellect, from a top down. We can come and we can participate with this creation and transform it. We have that as part of our image, because as the image of God in Genesis, not only are we to commune with him, but he gives us a command to go out and subdue. So we are here to co-rule and commune with the Lord. Yeah. And as such, it makes sense that we are made in a way to power that from that perspective. But the image of God is more than just what we have. It's in the conversation you guys had with Sherman, he talked about the image of God as a function. And I am very much a supporter of the function, not at the exclusion of the other categories, but that the other categories are in service to the function. They are to empower the function. And that function is, that purpose for every single human being is to commune with God and to co-rule creation forever with him. And that is a story that we can participate in. And that is a story that is largely missing from the world. And again, if you do not have a narrative, if you do not have where you're going, this can get hijacked and you can be used like a puppet from that perspective. But this is not how the Lord does it. He gives us this call. I read a quote a long time ago. I don't remember who it was from, but the quote was very, very simple. It said something like this: image of God is our gift, likeness of God our calling. And so Adam was made in the image of God, pure gift. And it says in Romans, I believe 11, that the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable.
Yep.
So here we have the image, and he's called to partnership and communion with God. Sadly, Adam steps the wrong way. He chooses disobedience, introduces death, introduces sin. So I think this is the beauty of what it means. Every single person was put here on this planet to commune with God. And in that communion with God, we are going to be transformed into his image. And no matter where we've been or what we've done, no matter where we are, God has made a way for it to be safe for us to come near to him, so that we can participate with him through Christ and his body, covered by his blood, and we can participate with God, be transformed, and co-rule creation with him forever. And that's a story that is desperately needed in the West today at a minimum.
Absolutely. Because you see, I mean, thinking about all of this like this, I mean, it puts a whole new emphasis on sin. It puts a whole new emphasis on love. It actually makes you want to, like, it motivates you to go out and actually obey. It's such a dirty word in today's society. Obedience. Oh man, it's slipping from me. Not antinomian, legalistic. You're legalistic if you think you should obey Christ. It's read 1 John, right? If we're not obeying Christ, we have no testimony in ourselves that we're Christians. If we're living in sin, you cannot call yourself a Christian according to 1 John. And so it puts a whole new emphasis on obedience, on love, and on sin, on disobedience at the same time, because it is great. This is a powerful thing. Just look out into the world. Look at worldly people, right? You see them, they are encapsulated by sin. I mean, what Jesus said it the best: what fills the heart, it comes out of the mouth. You speak what your heart is full of. And just listen to your people at work. Listen to family members, how they talk, how they act, how they speak, right? This is what fills their heart. And we see so much sin, which is why we need the gospel. I agree 100% with you, Gerritt. We need this story now more than ever, in my opinion, because the things are just getting worse. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my post mill friends, but I think things are getting worse. Okay, and it saddens me, to be honest, because we are living in a time where people from all over the United States, right here, can get together and actually collab, Josh, like you were saying, how it's so important to participate, to bring strengths that I don't have, that you guys do, to bring them together and formulate something new, to become something that never would have been if that connection never would have happened, right? That new thing couldn't have existed without that connection prior. And so I hear what you guys are saying, and I absolutely agree 100%. I think that this is something that needs to be talked about more, I think, which is why, Gerritt, we need to have you back on for part 2. But
maybe Sherman too.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely need Sherman. So, Josh, is there anything else you want to kind of add? We've got about 10 minutes left. We're winding down. Go ahead.
In the wind down process, what I want to do is emphasize the utility, like you just said. This is
100%.
not only just an idea, it's also something like a tool. And it's really incredible to think about it that way, where it can actually not only inform, like, oh, this lofty idea of how I'm viewing the world and I'm just kind of analyzing things around me. Like, no, not just that. Also understanding that you, the individual, the listener, right now, you have a purpose and you're surrounded by meaning. And even if you don't detect it immediately, you have a purpose and you're surrounded by meaning, and you're unique from among all creation, in that you can not only detect the meaning, but you can participate in the purpose willfully. It's really a privilege, but it's also a great responsibility that's on top of that. And the danger of it is, like Gerritt said, and like you just said, we're encapsulated in sin, right? You could think of it this way. The image of God ultimately is our position and our privilege. It's our calling to reflect God properly and be his ambassadors. That would be the right story to live in. And yet there are moments where we're not embodying that story properly. And what it looks like when you deviate from the proper story, let's call the proper story the will of God, his intention for you on the earth. When you deviate from that, by definition, it's called sin. So sin is almost equivalent to living in a false story. And it's like you're embodying lawlessness, where it's like only emergence. There's no emanation. There's nothing above. There's only me. And it's, and I could say just from my own experience that it's in those moments that I've forgotten the past, and even more so, I forget the future. Those are the moments where I sin. I'm more likely to fall in sin when I've forgotten the future. And so being able to apply what we're talking about now is something that I think will be invaluable to everyone, and that it actually is something that can scale down or scale up. And it doesn't matter where you're looking in terms of how to apply it. You can apply it to you, the individual. You can apply it to a person-to-person relationship, like marriage, brotherhood, friendship, enmity, any kind of thing, right? And then you can go beyond that. You can look at a family unit or a small organization or our little comradeship that we have here in this conversation. You can go beyond that to like a small community or a neighborhood. It behaves the same way. You can look at something like a city or a state. There's a guiding principle of those things also. And if we don't behave by it, we'll be living in a chaotic state. And you can look at things like countries in the way that they can, let's say Russia and Ukraine are neighboring countries and they're living in a conflict right now. And you can think of it as like the guiding principle of Russia is at war with the guiding principle of Ukraine. And what it's doing is causing pain within the body of those two unities. And the people in Ukraine are suffering, the individuals, but they're suffering in the same way the individual parts of my body would suffer if you stabbed me with a knife. Right. And so it's like the same kind of thing. It's a pattern, kind of like pond ripples. When you drop a stone in a pond and you see that one droplet in the center, that's the individual. But all of the rings that come out from there concentrically are a mirror image of every other one, just on a larger scale.
Bro, and think about it like this. I mean, very, very practical, right? The war in Ukraine and Russia, people say, had nothing to the United States, right? We are experiencing the effects of that. What's one example? Raising gas prices. $4 a gallon. Never seen them. I've never seen, Josh, I know you live in California, but I, in Indiana, have never seen $4 gas. That's a direct result of the war. And so it's the exact same thing. Break it down to the body of Christ. You, if you are Christ, if you are in Christ, if your faith is in Christ, your sin affects me. It affects Gerritt. It affects Josh. It affects the body of Christ worldwide, right? And so, again, we're just emphasizing this, right? I mean, talking about the narrative structure really brings, I'm really excited if you guys can't tell, but it brings a whole new light. And it makes me personally want to obey Christ. It makes me want to obey God, so that, because why? Because as First John again says, because I love my brothers. We know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. And I don't want to hurt you guys. I don't want to hurt anyone. I want to help you. I want to build you up. I want to help you become what you were intended to be. And I think this is why it's so important to do that, because we're going to be judged for it. People say, well, why is God going to throw people in hell? It's because he gave you something and you didn't do with it with what you were supposed to. That's part of it. He gave you that, and you did whatever you wanted to. You didn't respect it. You didn't be what you were supposed to be, and that's why you're going to be held accountable. I mean, one aspect of it. There's more to it than that, but that's one aspect to it. But Gerritt, sorry, I don't mean to keep rambling about it.
I like how Tyler called that rambling when in reality he just had a revelation about personal responsibility. Like right live on the episode was like, man, people, they have an intended state and a function and a purpose. Man, if you don't do that, you're totally blowing it. That's the whole, yes.
It's real, right? I mean, yes. One way to say it is, look, the tides move when the moon comes near, okay? Birds fly south in the winter. But man just ignores everything about what he's supposed to or should be aiming at and just does whatever he wants, and then cries about and wonders about why things aren't as peachy as he probably would desire them to be. You know, it's like you can't ignore your call, but expect the same results.
Right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. You can't raise up men without chests and wonder why there are traitors in your midst.
You know, I'm reminded, you know, because I think this is it, right? This is like the end. This is when we start closing up and kind of just recap real quick. So we're pretty much there. Because I was thinking, you know, part of this, you know, so I want to talk about just my own life for a second, because this has been such a profound thing for me to realize. And what I mean by that is this, you know, I introduced myself all those years ago as a former atheist, and I was. In fact, it was a great, and I say this with great shame, but it was a great joy of my life in college to try and, encounter believers at various places and just try to tear their faith down. And to this day, I'm really ashamed of it. But God used that person and transformed that person. But that transformation happened in a moment with an eye opening, and it was very much a parting of the Red Sea kind of moment for me. Okay, it was God. He did it. It was very obvious that he was the one doing it, and I was kind of there witnessing it. So in that sense, I'm like an Israelite standing on the sea, watching this happen and thinking, "Whoa!" Right? But as you and I think this happens to some people. Not all people all the time have a real powerful moment like that. I probably needed it because I'm hard-headed. Um, but see, as I go forward in life, I don't always have that the waters cleaved in front of you moment. And this is where what we are talking about is so profound. When the Israelites were crossing the Jordan after the Exodus, so after they saw the big moment of waters being divided, right? Well, when they had to cross the Jordan, the waters didn't divide for them. They had to go step in the water. And when they stepped into the water divided. And I think this is the lesson God is trying to call us to, that there's a sense in which he's going to show you this beautiful work up front. Christ being incarnate, Christ destroying death, rising from the dead. There's a moment where he comes in and does it for you so you can look back and remember what you have faith in. But that is so you can walk forward in faith and participate, to step into the water, into the unknown. Full assurance of the faith that God is there with you in that moment, and that he is there to support you and uphold you and to transform you more into his image and likeness while he reaches out through his body to build up and encourage another, right? So it's not always going to be the God cleaving the sea right in front of you, but understanding the practical reality of the story. You can participate in the story, and you can go put your foot in the water. And God is faithful. He has promised to be with you in that moment, and he is faithful. He will be there. You will be transformed, and you will grow in Christ likeness. Your fighting of your enemies will become easier. He will do it for you.
I think there's a lot of, this is one of the things that I learned, I think almost, I don't know, I don't want to say accidentally, like in a very weird around the back door sort of way, right? Like in the long way around, so to speak, right? That in Revelation, it says that the people of God overcome by the word of their testimony. That's crazy, man. Like, that's to think about the fact that the story of your own life is the power of overcoming even the time of the end. Like, that's something else. To think about the fact that we have the stories of people who were people of God from the time even before Christ came. We have stories of people who were people of God, but especially after Christ came, and not just the ones that are in the Bible, but like just the crazy amount of stories that we have of saints throughout time, and as well as the ones that I'm sure that we've met personally. I know there's a lot of people that I've met personally in my life, in my experience, that have just been absolutely like mainstay influences, even after, let's say, a lot of them have passed away. Like, but they're not absent, because all of the things that they gave to me, not only with how they embodied their principles in front of me, but what they told me about their own experiences, their stories. This is the transmission of wisdom from one generation to another. And I think that's bringing back the Dawkins thing. That's the whole mimetic thing, right? Is the transferring of the stories and how that influences selection. But this is something that I think, in the most practical sense, in my experience, is that sort of transfer, right? Now I, in some real sense, embody the spirit of my eldest uncle and my grandmother and my aunt and my best friends from my childhood and all the other influences that are accruing across time, I also embody or forsake those, right? And so throughout my experience, I can, let's say, become aware of the influence of something and then come to a moment of decision about whether or not I want to continue to participate in that specific spirit or influence or umbrella of influence or body of unity, or whatever it is, that whatever level of resolution you're looking at this at. Again, this really remarkable practicality, right? Noticing that all of these things, when they come together, this is the mind bender. You are some kind of co-author in time of God's story. That's the reality of this. You really are participating in and with God. By being alive, you do this. That's why when Christ says things like, "What you do unto the least of these, you have done unto me. And that which you have not done unto the least of these, you have not done unto me," right? And that when we are to understand how that relates to the two greatest commandments, that if you love the Lord your God with all your mind, whole heart, soul, and strength, right? All of your person, all of your being is invested in God, and your whole allegiance is toward God. By definition, I don't think that you could embody that at all without doing the second commandment, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. The images of God around you. Love the images to love the God as well. And that's the bottom up, top down thing as well. The whole thing encapsulated is the two tables of the law in the two greatest commandments, the vertical and the horizontal, appropriately across, right? The symbol of the very thing that we've been discussing this entire time. Like the way that it all comes together is the incarnation. Christ is the keystone of the entire story. Once that hits you, God is a person. Once that hits you, God is a person. God is persons. One of them elected to come out of glory and into material reality and share in your humanity. This is the central happening of all that is happening in the story, in our perspective here, right? So what is God going to do with this in the ultimate sense? Again, that's the trajectory. That's the story. You participate in that story. Bless the Lord. Man. I wish I had like a worship song I could play after this.
God is faithful. God is faithful.
Oh yeah. This is so good. Man, I am satisfied. Are you satisfied?
Very, very. I'm
Fantastic.
again very grateful to have. It's an honor to do this with you, Josh. And again, I truly think of myself as a Padawan to you in this regard. So the stuff that we've been able to explore together again has given such a framework for me to hang things on and to be a better leader, and not just at the company I work at, but in my own home and in my own personal life. So again, to me, this is so profound, so helpful, so clarifying, and so encouraging. I mean, just go participate. Just go participate, whether you feel it or not. Just there's this point in Christ's life where he talks about how he can do nothing except what the Father shows him. Well, may our eyes be open to see what Christ is doing in the world, and may we go participate, and may we say the same thing, that we can do nothing but what Christ shows us.
Amen. Man, I have a list scrolling at the bottom of relevant episodes that I have on the Cosmic Corner playlist. I told Gerritt this privately. I'll say it right now. I believe the episode that we just reviewed from Complete Sinner's Guide was the conception moment for Cosmic Corner. And I am so pleased to be this far along. It has been a wild ride, y'all. This is cool. It is so awesome to try and do what the Lord has for you and just see what he does. It is a wild ride. Seriously. Man, I am so happy. Take a screenshot of the list of things that I have here if you want to, just so you can. Just an announcement also before we hop off of here, because I feel like like I said, I'm satisfied. So on the 20th, we're going to be doing part 2 of the Pixar Inside Out movie a discussion.
Don't
Gerritt,
miss
are you
that.
coming for that one?
Don't miss that. I don't know. It's doubtful at this point. I got a lot of stuff going on at work. I'm trying to get done so I can enjoy my holiday weekend. So I'm not sure. My gut tells me no right now. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, if the Lord feels ready to open up that Red Sea for you, I'd be more than appreciative also. But I understand.
I'll be there if so. Because that Inside Out episode, watch the first one. Don't miss the second one. Incredible content. Some of it, you'll even pull in some of the stuff we've talked about here into that conversation. Yes. Incredible movie, and great panel to review it and talk about it.
Yes, fantastic story. And I also appreciate, thank you, Gerritt, for your encouragement, because I really do sometimes have that sneaking suspicion that this is just a hobby of mine that I enjoy, but to know that this is something that's actually helped people, and just people that, like, not just people in the general sense, but people that I care about you, right? Like, thank you for letting me know, because that's an encouragement for me too. So if you're listening to this, go and tell your pastor that he's a blessing to you. How about that? That's your homework for tonight, y'all. Participate in that way. Tell your pastor that he's a blessing to you. Thank him. Encourage him. Pray for him. Pray for his family, his wife. Pray for your ministers, guys. Pray for them. Let them know that you appreciate them. It really is something else. You don't understand. If you've never done that, please do that. If you have done that, please continue to do that. Man, this is so great. Bless the Lord. I feel like worshiping. It is time to go. Good night. God bless. Stay like Christ.